and he's a Navy man, so he talked last year, and we thought you might as well be talking about Navy.
Yeah.
So he picked this subject today, and I will let go with you.
Thanks, Stan. Stan called me here a while ago and said that I hadn't thought much about it. He said, you know, it's about time we had somebody talk about the Navy. I said, okay, yeah, we can do that. And I have mentioned the Navy before in relation to Fort Fisher, where, what's his name?
Curtis.
Curtis. General Curtis was at Fort Fisher. And the Navy had quite a bit to do with the two battles he was in there at Fort Fisher. And I might mention that my daughter and son-in-law own General Curtis's home in Ogdensburg. Some of you already know that. But we didn't find any house been tore apart, but there wasn't anything. The only thing we found is that in the back there was a board signed by, and my daughter finally found him in the books. He's a master carpenter in Ogdensburg. He must have worked in there, and it was, I think it was 1861 is when it was signed, when he had signed that. But, I thought about it, and I thought, well, you know, I've talked about the ships and all stuff. Let's do something a little different. We'll do the submarines today. And I taught technology education at Ogdensburg Free Academy for 29 years, which is also, everybody knows, a shop, really. And then I had, and before I started teaching, before I went to college, I had 3.5 years in the Navy. And then 16 years later, I went back in the reserves, so I had another 21 reserves, so I got a retirement from that too. So I kind of got dual careers, or dual retirements, I guess you could say. Labor Day weekend, you know, I can't get through this without telling a sea tale of some kind here. Sailors always got to tell a sea tale there. Timmy, he's half asleep back there, but he's going to wake up in a minute here. Labor Day weekend, over in Doug's Tavern, it was Pirates weekend, and I saw Timmy in there. And you couldn't hear it, you couldn't talk nothing, it was so loud, it was bad in there. He had some pirate band or something, and all kinds of stuff going on. But I thought about it afterwards. Everybody's in there, they got a pirate outfit on, you know, and they got the Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones flags and all that stuff. And I thought afterwards, I was probably about the only one, or one of very few people that ever sailed under that pirate flag. Most people don't know the tradition in the Navy. When you cross the equator, there's an initiation, and you go from being a pollywog to a shellback. And every time I think about the shellback, I think of the big old turtles in the creek that runs through my front yard, the snapping turtles there. And so I thought, well, you know, I'll mention that today. What it amounted to at 8 o'clock that morning that we crossed the equator, the American flag come down off the mast, and the skull and crossbones went up on the mast. So the ship was actually under the skull and crossbones. And anybody that had crossed the equator before, had been initiated, had to do the initiation on the rest of us. There was well over 100 of us that had never crossed the equator before. So I'm just going to mention a couple of things. One of them was the very first thing, you had to be clean for this. So they took us in groups up to the forecastle, up to the front of the ship, and all you had on was your undershorts. And then they turned the saltwater hoses on you. And that's how they cleaned you down, to make sure you were cleaned. And then it progressed from there through the rest of the day. I saw the flag come down once because I saw a commercial ship of some kind off a little bit from us. And I suppose they didn't want people to think that somebody had taken over this U.S. Navy ship, you know. But all the pirates that were in there that day, Timmy, I was probably the real pirate that was in there. But anyhow, we'll get back to submarines. And the first U.S. submarine, I want to pass up some sheets here, because there's some pictures on it. Pass those back out, you know, pretty much can go around. There's a picture, the first picture on there is the submarine turtle. And this was built by David Bushnell in 1775. And this was made, what they do is come up underneath the ship and attach an explosive device to it to blow it up. And they were trying to blow up ships in British ships in the North American harbors. At that time, George Washington was our commander-in-chief, and he had his doubts, but he still provided the funds and the support for the development and the testing of this submarine, the Turtle. He then they tried several times to sink British ships with it, but it never worked out. So eventually, well, what happened eventually was the British sank the sub and its transporters, the transport moved around. So that was the end of the Turtle. Now there are some replicas of it around, and I've seen the one in Groton, Connecticut, the Submarine Museum there. There's one of the Turtle there. The next submarine to show up scene was the USS Alligator. And I think that's the second picture down there. And it was 30 feet long and 6 to 8 feet in diameter. It carried 18 men and was powered by 16 paddles protruding from the side. Now, this is 1862, their technology. How did they seal those paddles? Yeah. So they had to have been some kind of rubber seal or whatever, some kind of sealing around.
Can't be down too far either.
Yeah, because the paddles move right and the water's right out there, so. Which, I wondered how they did that. But eventually the Washington Naval Shipyard removed the paddles. They just weren't efficient. And then they put in a hand crank propeller after that. But they did end up, after they put the hand crank propeller in, they ended up being able to do about 4 knots underwater, which is a pretty good speed. Not bad at all. Yeah. And the way it was set up so underwater, there was a diver in it. The diver would go out of the sub, under the water, go up to the ship, place a charge on it, string an insulated copper wire back to the submarine, and then they would detonate it from the submarine. This is how it operated. It was either a bomb or a mine, whatever you want to call it, that they planted under the ship. And the agreement was the sub was to be built in no more than 40 days. So 180 days later, it was done. The government overrun, right?
It was done.
Yeah.
All in 40 days.
But and it was towed to several engagements,
It was done.
but never used. It was never used. And now this one sent to Washington Naval Shipyard, where it was pronounced a failure, and that's when they then put the crank on it there to operate the propeller. So, but in March 18th, 1863, President Lincoln observed the sub in operation, and which to me is kind of interesting because President George Washington saw the first one and President Lincoln the second one that we had. Now this was actually a U.S. Navy submarine, the Alligator was. It was towed to Port Royal, South Carolina, and on the way there they met with some real bad weather, and they finally had to cut it adrift and let it go, and it sank, so that was the end of it. And about all I found, I know in 2005 they had started a search. They hoped to find it and bring it up the same as they had done with the Hunley, but as far I could find no more that whatever happened. I don't think they got any further with it. So that brings us up to the H.L. Hunley, which is the Confederate submarine. And she was the first combat sub to actually sink a ship, a warship. She also lost 21 crewmen and 3 sinkings in her short career. She was 40 feet long and launched in July of 1863, so it would be pretty well into the Civil War when it was launched. And during a test run on August 29th, she sank, killing all 5 crew members. Well, they brought it back up again and went through it, whatever. And again, on October 15th, she sank again, taking 8 crew members to the bottom. Well, one of the people on there was H.L. Huntley, the guy that designed and built the submarine. He was there, we assume, to check it out and see how operational and what it did and so forth, you know. So he died on the second sinking, and it was raised and returned to duty both times. Now the second time, apparently, it had been underwater too long. The bodies bloated. They couldn't get them up through the hatch, so they had to be surgically removed, get them out of the submarine. I don't know who had the pleasure of getting that job.
Oh, yes.
Either they were ordered to or they got paid well, one or the other, right? But anyhow, they brought it back to use it a third time. So then on February 17th, 1864, the Huntley attacked the U.S. Navy sloop of war, the USS Housatonic, in Charleston's outer harbor, and sank her. But unfortunately, when they sank it, they sank themselves. They had the charges on the spar off the front, and they pushed it up against the Housatonic, and it apparently, when it exploded, it was such a shock and such force that it killed all them in the submarine immediately. Just immediately, they were all dead. They didn't know what had happened, because when they did bring it up, everybody was right at their stations where they would have been on that submarine. So that's what they figured. It was so quick, just like that, it was all over. They located it in 1995, and they raised it in 2000. And it's on display at the Warren Larsh Conservation Center on Cooper River, North Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Sheila and I have been there. We saw it being conserved. We were probably there not too long after. They were just starting conservation, because it was still, all that stuff has to be kept underwater. You can't bring it out and expose it immediately or gone. That's the end of it. So, but we did see it in the process of being conserved, whatever. And like I said, the men were all died immediately. The crew died immediately, and they took. Let me see what I got. Okay, they took each of the skulls and made a casting of them. Then through forensics and ethnic background checks, they determined basically where every man was from, of the 8 men, and what their ethnic background is, and they rebuilt their skull. Now they do this with markers. They put markers on different parts of the skull that will tell you how deep the skin is, and then they build it up from there. So that they ended up with the skull of every one of those submariners off that boat. So then they had the funeral, and being the good pack rat that I am, unfortunately I've got the newspapers, brought them home, and here's a picture of the funeral procession. There were thousands and thousands there. Every submariner, active, retired, whatever, all the Confederate reenactors, everybody was there for that funeral. That funeral. Here, I'll pass that around. So that was a big deal there, that funeral, when they had that. Anybody got any questions so far? I'll try to answer them.
HL is his name.
Horace L. Horace L.
Horace.
Yeah, Horace.
How did the Huntley operate? You mentioned the turtle operated either through paddles or for the crank
Right.
propeller. How did the Huntley operate?
Huntley it had the crank propeller. That's in, you're going to see that in a few minutes here, where everybody's position was in the submarine. And they cranked on that thing. Anything else before we continue on?
Just a little back history on it too. The Huntley was originally built in New Orleans, and then it was Jefferson Davison found out about it, he had it brought to Charleston. He
Yep.
had his own people, but his own people couldn't operate it, so the crew who built it were brought from New Orleans
Yep.
to Charleston to man it and operate the Hunley.
And we're gonna meet those people in just a minute here, we're gonna meet the
Oh,
crew.
okay, I'm sorry.
No, no, that's fine, no, you're
Go
right,
ahead.
that's right. So, if there's no more questions, we'll meet the crew.
So she had a question.
Yep.
Well, see, first of all, I didn't know about the alligator, the turtle, and I knew that the Huntley had taken out the Estonia and never came back up. I didn't know there'd been 2 other times when it sunk.
Yeah, two times previous to
Yeah.
that. Now think about that.
Yeah, that's,
How would you get a new crew to go on that thing?
Yeah.
How would you run down
That'd be a little
twice, right?
Yeah.
how'd you get it
Definitely
out?
Leary.
Yeah, but how'd they get it?
Well, don't that's to get them out.
I'm gonna pass you out a sheet that shows you the,
How'd they get them out?
each of the crew and where they were located on the submarine and so forth, and I'll wait till those get passed around, then we'll talk about that.
Sorry about that.
We haven't got anything here, do we, Stan?
Just the display, I guess.
Yeah.
You can see it in that part?
I'll just hold it up here. Here's how they did the facial reconstructions. I'll pass this newspaper around afterwards. Here's how that facial reconstruction was done of each person.
Just, can you put it up for another second here? I didn't catch it.
You up?
The newspaper, just for a sec. You have to bear with me, I'm new to this. Okay,
You get it?
okay, just slide it up higher. Whoops, okay, bring it down a little bit. There, okay, I'm scanning them. Okay, thank you.
Like I say, time to meet the crew.
Yeah.
Start at the upper left-hand corner, and that is George Dixon. He was the captain of the sub. He was 24 to 25 years old, 5 foot 9 inches tall in the North America. He was in the 21st Alabama Confederate Army. He was a steamboat engineer before the war and was wounded at Shiloh, which probably having worked on boats and so forth, some of the reason he ended up on the sub. When he was wounded, he had a gold coin in his pocket, and it deflected the bullet, and so that he didn't get killed. They figured that that gold coin saved his life. And he had that gold coin sanded off on the back and inscribed with the date and everything on it. And when they were bringing the stuff out of the submarine, they did find the gold coin on the bottom of the submarine, right there. So Sheila and I had seen that because they had it on display under a glass case. Story was that a girlfriend had given him the coin, but they've never been able to prove that that story is true. That sounds good, I guess. So that was George Dixon. Then on the bottom left is Arnold Becker. He was aged 19 to 22. They were, able to come up with all this stuff through census and their forensics and everything, DNA, everything else he did to these bodies. And he was 5 foot 6 inches tall and European. He was in the Confederate Navy aboard the CSS Indian Chief, which was a schooner used in mine-laying operations. Becker operated the Hunley's forward ballast tank pump and the ventilation system. He was a native of Europe. He'd come from Europe and had arrived in America just shortly before the Civil War started, so he was new to America. Then we'll go back up the top row. I guess I'll show you here. You see the little color here. There's George there. And here's Arnold down below him there.
Just
Like I say, I'll pass this around so everybody can see it afterwards. Now, let's see, we're second on the top from the left is C. Lumpkin.
Yeah, okay.
He was age 37 to 45. He was 5'10", and he was born in Europe. He was also in the Confederate Navy. He was on the CSS Indian Chief. You'll find quite a few of these guys were on that particular ship. And he'd been in America for many years and was likely a merchant sailor. Yes.
I'm sorry we were late. Could I just ask a couple of quick things as catch-up? Just because I'm sure there's things you said already. One, just when was the tunneling brought out?
It was found in 1995 and brought up in 2000.
Okay, and that paper is how old? I'm just,
This paper here,
yeah.
that April 17, 2004.
Okay, I just want to get that kind of time count.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
That everything? You got?
For the moment, I
Okay.
was just, I
Okay.
was afraid I'd forget to ask later.
Yeah, no, the newspapers I picked up when we were down there at the time of the funeral and all that stuff.
Uh-huh. The funeral was, that was another question. The funeral was for which person?
All of them.
Oh, they had a funeral for the whole crew?
Yeah, for the
That's
whole
what that was.
crew.
Okay.
Yeah, they reconstructed the heads of this crew and they had a funeral for all of them. And I believe I can't tell you which cemetery it was, but I believe they were all buried there where the other ones that had gone down with the Huntley were all buried in the same area in the cemetery, so. Okay, we could just cover there, C. Lumpkin, right?
Yep.
Okay, second on the bottom from the left is Frank Collins. Now, Frank was age, Frank right there. Frank was 23 to 26 years old, 6'1", and born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So he was one of the local guys from Virginia. And I would say at 6'1", I think he's the tallest one, and I think it might have been a little crowded for him in there too. You know?
Probably hit the ceiling.
And so,
Yeah.
that's good.
And he'd also been assigned to the CSS Indian Chief. In the 1860 census, he was listed as a common day laborer. When the war started, he enlisted in the Confederate Navy, so that's what we know about him. Now, you probably, if you later on want to go to the computer and go in and check their names, you'll probably find a little more information about some of them, you know, a little more there, so. Then the third from the left, J.F. Carlson, where is he? He'd be in the top row. Top row.
Yeah,
J.F. Carlson right there. Okay, he's age 20 to 23, 5'10", and born in Northern Europe. I believe he was Danish. And he started as a helmsman on the privateer Jeff Davis, and then he joined the German artillery in the Civil War and fought in several major battles. He was the last man to join the crew, and you'll see where he's seated on the sub. There's 3 on one side of him and 3 on the other side of him, I think, or 4 on the other side. Four on the other side. Well, that was called the dead man's seat. Since he was the last one to get aboard, he got the honor of getting that seat. Reason being, there's a hatch in each end. How do you think you're going to get out of there when this thing goes down?
You're not.
Everybody's going to get out before you do. That was referred to as the dead man's seat. Not that it made any difference when it went down this time. So. But it was the dead man's seat. His father was a cobbler, and his teeth showed marks of being a cobbler. And I assume that when they checked the teeth, they probably saw marks when he pulled the thread, bit the thread off, or held the cobbler nails in his teeth. It's just amazing, if you're into the forensic part of it, what you can find by looking at, you know, just like the teeth, that sort of stuff. And trying to think of this off the top of my head. I think they could tell from what they found too, the Europeans would have eaten more corn than we did in this country. So they could tell from their diets just whatever they found, when they went through this forensic, probably, in the bone and so forth, when they tested all that. So, that was J.F. Carlson. Then, let's see, J.F. On the bottom, from the left, the third one from the left, on the bottom, is a man called Miller. And he was age 40 to 45, 5 foot 8 tall, and European. Now they know very little about him. The genealogists were not able to find anything out. I don't know if they, have, when they studied it since, if they found out more about him, or what there was. But,
Could be a wrong name.
Pardon?
Could be a wrong name.
Oh, yeah, they're not even sure, on that, what there was, because if we went back to, where was it? C. Lumpkin, now, they found that there was names, C. Sumpkin and a couple different spellings, but they finally settled on Lumpkin as being the name for that guy. So, then the last on the bottom row is, who's that? Miller. There's Miller right there. Okay. And last on the top row is James Wicks. James was age 44 to 45, 5 foot 10, and he was from North Carolina, so he was a U.S. citizen. He began his service aboard the U.S. Navy ship, USS Congress. So he was a Union sailor. He then joined the Confederate Navy and was assigned to the CSS Indian Chief. So he was on the Indian Chief. The reason he was a career Navy man, and the reason he joined the Confederate Navy is because the CSS Virginia had defeated his ship, the Union ship. So I guess he decided maybe safer to be on the other side. So that's where he came from. That was, James Witt. Should be right there. And then lastly on the bottom is Joseph Ridgway, age 30. He's 5 foot 10 and was from Talbot County, Maryland. So he was a Southerner too. And he too was assigned to the CSS Indian Chief. And he was the son of a wealthy sea captain and sailed on his father's ship from an early age and was the first officer, and as such he operated the sub's aft ballast tank. The other one was forward, operated forward tanks, he operated the aft tanks. And it kind of surprised me, if he's son of a wealthy sea captain, that he was even in the military or involved in any of that. But he was, so. But what I tried to do is just give you a quick overview. There's a lot more on the internet available if you want to, I'll pass this newspaper around so you can look at them. If you want to research it there, like I say, there's a lot more out there. And it's all very interesting. And someday I hope to get back down there in Charleston and get over there and see what they've done with it now. Like I said, it takes a while to preserve that stuff, because you just can't bring it up out of the water, because then it'll disintegrate immediately. So it's got to be worked at to take it apart there. Now, anybody else got any questions here before I go on a little bit more stuff here?
Unfortunately, I had a DVD with pictures of the guy who was the crane operator.
Oh,
He
okay.
brought up, and I just couldn't find it.
Oh,
But when they brought it up, they had a whole cage holding on there.
Oh, yeah, because it would have just fell apart if they hadn't been well protected when they brought it up. So and this isn't Navy or submarines, but I did bring this book over. This is a museum in Kansas. What this was it was Steamboat Arabia. If you ever get a chance to go see that, very, very interesting. It had sunk on the Missouri River, and it was 1859, I believe, is when it sunk, just before the Civil War. And what it was carrying supplies up the river to all the towns, to their hardware stores. So this thing was loaded and loaded with hardware. Well, a couple attempts had been made to find it because somebody believed that it was loaded with liquor, but it wasn't. So a couple attempts, but they never found it. Well, this young fella and his father and brother and some other people did a lot of research, and they found where it had sunk. It was now, since the river had changed, it was underneath a cornfield. Hard to believe. So they dug it up, and every night they would bring up stuff and have to rebury it again, because same thing, you couldn't just expose it to the air. And everything on that was perfectly preserved, perfectly preserved. Now, the day we were at the museum, there was a young lady there. She was working in the back. You could see her through the glass. She had a pair of leather boots. All those leather boots, everything was fine except for the thread, which was cotton, and that had rotted. She was actually sewing those boots back together through the original holes. Now think about that. You got
Oh, boy, that had to be.
yeah. So it was really interesting. They probably since we've been there, they've done well. Originally, they were going to bring it up and sell all the stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they decided to do it in a museum, which was great because you get a chance to take a look through this book here this afternoon. But it's so interesting to see how they did that stuff. Now, they were going to build a house. There were 2 houses on it. I don't know if some of you are aware that I think it was Sears and Roebuck used to sell a house through their catalog. You order that house and they bring it probably in on a railway or something, and then you take, well, there was 2 of those houses on this thing. And they were gonna take one of those and actually construct it, put it up. And I assume, this has been a few years since we were out there, but they've probably done that by now.
Where is this located?
I'll have to go back and look. It's in Kansas, I'm pretty sure.
I think it was around Kansas City.
Kansas City, someplace in there. Well, I don't know, we just happened to run across it in a brochure or something, I guess, and decided to go see it. There was, everybody survived off it when it went down, except the mule. There was a donkey, a mule. Well, of course, if you could have went back and killed the owner, but he said he was too stubborn. He couldn't get him off the ship. He wouldn't leave the ship. Well, there was this halter tied to a metal stanchion. So it wasn't, he was too stubborn, he never had a chance to get off the ship. So. But that's not what the owner told.
Tell me what piece of the ship they did bring up and preserve.
What, go ahead.
Was it the very front of it?
I think it was the bow.
They brought it up and they got it on display and they preserved it, but for I don't know how many days and days, every night, when the museum was closed, it was sprayed with
There's a
polyethylene
Chemical.
glycol
Yeah.
until there was enough absorbed in the wood that it wouldn't rot, so.
They did show one, or a rolling pin that they'd forgotten to bury one night. And about 3 days later, that shrunk right up to nothing. There was nothing left of it. That's why everything had, so it's like the submarine. It's very interesting in the preservation process and what they had to do to preserve these things and what goes on. And I gotta assume very, very expensive too.
Do you got any idea who's sponsoring that dig?
This one here, I don't
The
think,
Steamboat Arabia? Who's-
yeah, I think that young man and his family
Yeah,
were doing it probably.
Wow.
He was, fortunately, we were lucky, we were there, he was there the day we were there, and he actually autographed this book to us. This is his book, and he autographed the book to us. And he was very interesting. How did he put that? The the first colored picture since the Civil War, or something like that, because they had pictures of the jars of blueberries that come off it. And of course, they're all blue, they're right there. And in the day they were made, there was no colored photography, so. But he had a lot of, there was all kind, and they tried some of the foods, they opened some of those cans. But there was everything on there you could want for hardware store, axes and clothing and buttons, a lot of buttons, all kinds of colored buttons.
Little tiny
Little
beads.
tiny beads, those are called trade beads. That's what the Indians, you know about that, the
Yeah.
Indians take those trade beads and make fancy stuff, and that was all carried there to be sold to the Indians or traded to the Indians. Everything you can imagine on that. But it's probably actually more interesting than the Hunley is when you go right down to it and start looking at that stuff. But,
Well, thank you very much.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
I've got a lot of respect for the guys who brought on submarines today.